Welcome back to ReadingBear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, Park in the Handicapped Parking Space. Here I was, thinking that I'd ran out of entitled people's stories that don't involve my mother, but I'm back with yet another one. This happened a few days ago. I'm recovering from abdominal surgery 12 days prior to when this happened. I was finally feeling up for shopping and there were things I needed from the hardware store. I'm a 30-years-old disabled female in a wheelchair, incomplete quadriplegic, and I don't have a car, so I got a taxi there, one with a ramp on the back so I don't have to get out of my wheelchair. Mr. Taxi Man, who we'll call Bruce, dropped me off and I went in to do my thing. Nothing out of the ordinary. When I finished my shopping, I called to get the taxi back. It would be a 15-minute wait, but it was such a nice day that I didn't mind waiting outside. As I was waiting, I noticed that someone was parked in the disabled parking space, but there was no disabled tags on the windscreen. Annoying, but I honestly didn't care at that point. I just wanted to get home. About 10 minutes later, I saw a middle-aged woman walk out of the store and went straight to that car. She opened the boot, put her shopping in and went around to the driver's side. But instead of getting in, though, she got out a cigarette and started looking at her phone. A few minutes after that, I saw my taxi arrive. Bruce, being the polite and patient man he is, waited for the woman to drive out of the car space. Karen knew he was waiting for her and she was damn sure she was parking illegally in the disabled parking space, but do you think she cared? She finished her cigarette and got into her car. We waited. And waited. Then waited some more. Until Bruce got rightly fed up and parked the taxi directly behind Karen's car, blocking her in. This is when things got interesting. Karen began to honk her horn repetitively for a few seconds, before she got out of her car. Karen, what the bloody heck do ya think you're doing? Ya blocked me in. Bruce, in a mocking apologetic tone, I'm very sorry ma'am, but I needed the car space. And you seem to want to stay there. Just thought I'd do you a favor. Now, if you don't mind, I have a job to do. Bryce gestured in my direction as I gave Karen a big smile. I hate confrontation, so I appreciated Bruce doing it for me. Bruce got into the car and fastened me and my wheelchair into place, all the while with Karen yelling profanities and threatening to call the police. If it were any other day, I would have been happy to call the police so Karen would get a fine. But I just wanted to go home. It only took a few minutes before I was secured in the car and we left, but I made sure to give Karen a smile and a one-finger salute through the window as we were leaving, which made the encounter all the more sweeter. The next one is titled, Stepmonster with 2 master's degrees is still jealous of me professionally. Backstory: my stepmonster was 13 years younger than my dad and had an associate's degree when they married. Dad supported her while she got a bachelor's in education, then 2 education-related master's degrees. It was so hard to live in the same house with her that I ditched an art scholarship to go live in the big city and to work. She didn't like that I managed to escape her control and told me many times that I would never amount to anything without a college degree. Part of this was that she was a narcissist and I was her goat, while my pot-smoking stepbrother was her golden child. Fast forward 20 years. I had enlisted in the US Navy, working in a highly technical job including a stint at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station doing telemetry for Navy launches, then as a civilian found my way into work in simulation, including full-motion flight simulators. While working for an aviation company that everyone has heard of, I got an opportunity to substitute teach at the local technical college that my boss taught at evenings on the nights when he had to travel. All of this with the equivalence of an associate's degree and a lot of experience. The petty revenge, knowing how much it would bother her, the next time I visited my dad I casually mentioned that I was teaching classes occasionally at the local technical college in full earshot of Stepmonster, something that her degrees had never permitted. I also told him what I was getting paid for my regular job, which was a lot more than she was making teaching junior high school. I know it was petty, but it felt so good to rub her face in my success that she worked so hard to sabotage. The next one is titled, Psycho Ex-Wife Gets Served. Literally. I divorced my first wife back in 2012. Long story short, on top of many issues she had, her infidelity was the last straw for me. I've since remarried and have a beautiful baby boy. Shortly after the divorce, while then single, my ex would contact me out of nowhere apologizing for everything and asking for me back. I would kindly tell her no and wish her the best. She would then immediately flip out on me, calling me a jerk and blah blah blah, reassuring my decision. This happened a handful of times over the next year or two. A few years later I married the type of woman every man dreams about: independent, intelligent, funny, generous, caring, selfless and beautiful. Within weeks of us getting married, my wife and all of her close friends received a friend request on Facebook from a very suspicious profile. Again, my wife is very intelligent, and with a little bit of detective work concluded without a doubt that the fake profile was in fact my ex. She kindly sent her an instant message letting her know she wasn't fooling anyone, and wouldn't you know, the profile disappeared. This same thing has happened several times over the past few years. A year ago we became parents, and that is when things got really bad. Along with social media stalking came actual stalking. I would notice her car parked down the street from my house. I would make a point to walk towards it and it would suddenly drive off. We finally ended up getting off social media for the privacy of our family. I found out later through a friend that she had gotten remarried as well. Kicker to that is she married a dude with the same first name as my wife. The craziness starts. One morning I woke up to a very odd text message. The person was claiming to be a friend of mine who I had dated at one point following my divorce, asking if I wanted to meet for sex. I found this very odd, which that friend is very classy and it wasn't like her to do that. The next morning I called the number back that it came from, and wouldn't you know, ITWAS, the voicemail of my ex. I was furious. I called again later that day and managed to get her to answer. She denied sending the text and claimed that phone was stolen. Really? I then received some very colorful voicemails from her in which she proved herself to be unstable. Over the next few weeks my wife and I continued to receive very concerning text messages here and there from burners. I'm watching you, how's my dog? I got him and the house in the divorce, and finally, better take good care of that baby. That was it for me. I reported what I felt to be threatening messages to the police. They told me that they couldn't do anything about the messages that came from the burners because there was no way to prove it was her. They were useless. My next course of action was to get a restraining order against her. This was easily accomplished by utilizing the odd text message in which she claimed to be another person, as well as the colorful voicemails. The best part is which I was filing it as being fearful for my safety as well as the safety of my family. The order would also have to be made public and presented to anyone and everyone she lives with, meaning her husband and in-laws. That means they would get to see the screenshots of the trashy text messages and read the dialogue of the voicemails she left. That would be entertainment at its finest. The tricky part now was just getting her served. I hired a private service company to serve her the restraining order. However, I assumed she would see this coming. My ex is one of those gals who bought a camera and suddenly started calling herself a photographer. She has a Facebook page. My wife had the idea to have someone message her and set up an appointment for a photo shoot at a park or something for senior pictures. That friend came through with flying colors. On the day she was to get served, my wife and I drove to the park for front row seats. I spotted her sitting in her car waiting for her client. I then called the server to direct him to her location. He kept me on speaker so we can hear the whole thing go down from a distance. It was wonderful. We watched the service officer slowly pull up next to her car, both cars facing the same direction. He then got out of his car and walked around walking up to her side window. We heard him knock on the window through the phone and her driver's window rolled down. From the distance we could still make out the puzzled look on her face. Ashley Smith? Fake name obviously, yes? I am an officer of the court for XYZ County, and these documents are for you. What is this? You have been served, have a nice day. He then walked back around to his car and pulled away. Him and I shared a short laugh over the phone and I thanked him for his help. I was shocked to hear him laugh over the whole thing. I guess it would be kind of fun to ruin people's day for a living. With the big yellow envelope in her hands, I drove by her on my way out of the parking lot as she sat in the driver's seat of her car. I slowed down to make sure she saw me. She looked like a deer in headlights. With my passing by, she now knew what was in the envelope without even opening it, I assume. Haven't heard much from her since. I did hear from a friend that day who knew what was going down, that her Facebook page had been taken down that evening. I'm assuming she did it out of shame, or her husband was so livid with her she got grounded. Ha ha ha. The next one is titled, "Blackmail Me into Not Reporting Him to Police? Lose Your Job." When I was 19, I worked in a one-man store in my local area. Sure, there were a lot of entitled people that came in, but there were also absolutely lovely regulars that I bonded with. Unfortunately, what happened didn't involve one of the nice regulars but a creepy, older man. The man was probably in his 40s, dirty, and just an outright creep. The shop didn't have any panic buttons, so when he came in, I was on my own. He was a pervert who would just come in to harass me. He would lean over the counter to stroke my arms, make disgusting derogatory comments towards me, and try to fill me up any time I left the counter. I hated working there because of this guy. I reported him to the manager multiple times, but nothing was ever done. I even showed him the CCTV, but again, nothing would happen. One day, the man came in saying to me extremely sexual things and tried to grab my breasts. I just snapped. I shoved him away from me, telling him to get out of the store, and that if he didn't stop, I would report him to the police. The guy laughed at me and said there was nothing I could do, until I pointed at the cameras. This enraged the guy, and he told me how he knew I lived in the area, so if he finds me, I would end up in a hospital because of the things he would do. He left, but I was absolutely terrified. I knew this guy was ex-military, and he could easily overpower me. After this, he came into the store displaying what looked like weapons and followed me when I visited local stores. On a shift swap, I nervously came into my work as the manager was cashing his register. He saw me and asked what was wrong, and I told him what was happening. I said how I need to report this guy to the police but needed evidence, so I mentioned the CCTV. My manager responded, "I'm so sorry, but I'm afraid you can't do that. If you do, then they will do a background check on you, and I will have to tell them everything I know about you." This terrified me even more. The manager was a friend of mine and was the reason I got that job to begin with. He knew that I had home problems, so he was basically telling me that he would tell the police about it and rip my family apart. He added, "See, I value you as a friend, but after seeing your true colors when you refused to go out with me kind of tells me to be honest to the police. Do you really want to involve them?" It became evident that the reason he never handled my complaints before is that I rejected him. He asked me out a few times, which I rejected but didn't think much of it. Sadly, this got to me, and I never reported what happened. As scared as I was, I didn't want my family to be destroyed and wasn't going to go out with him just to get the evidence I needed. Instead, I started to plot my revenge against the manager. The area manager and my manager were good friends. He let him off with everything during inspections, but rumor had it that the area manager was moving to a different location, meaning that a new one would come in and do an inspection. Knowing this, I patiently waited to see if this was true. One day, I went in and saw a man I had never seen before. It was the new area manager, and he was in doing an inspection while the manager wasn't there. Turned out, he met the manager before and did not like him one bit, so he was trying to find something to fire him. He told me that he wanted to monitor the things I would do day to day in the shop, and so I did badly. I made sure to duck up every chance I got, not scanning items, not checking everyone's IDs, stocking things wrong, etc. The area manager was horrified and asked me if I was ever trained. I told him the truth, I wasn't, but he brought up my file saying I signed to say I did receive training. Luckily, my dad always encouraged me to keep a log of everything I do at work, so I gave him the week I started and the day I signed it, telling him that he just got me to sign it, and he could check the cameras, which of course he did. As a result, he sat me down and asked me what other things my manager did that he wasn't aware of. I told him everything, that he makes me and my coworker take over his shifts to leave early, how he never fulfilled requests for holidays and took them away last minute. And more, including how he never processed official complaints and would persuade us not to report incidents. He asked what kind of incidents, and I told him about the customer and how he blackmailed me not to report it to the police, saying how the only way he was going to help me was if I dated him. The area manager was disgusted and asked if I had all the relevant dates to prove what I was saying. I handed him my logbook and said that I felt awful telling him all this as I didn't want anyone to get into trouble. That was a lie, of course I wanted results. The area manager reassured me that nothing was going to happen to me as this was all on the manager. I didn't hear much of it until, eventually, my manager never came into work and a new guy was there. I asked where the manager was and was told he got fired. Turned out he had a hearing that he thought was just about how he managed the store when it was actually a lot more serious than that. He wasn't just pulled up on what happened with me, but it was revealed he was falsifying paperwork and falsifying his hours. He was stealing money from the store. So, he was subsequently fired for falsifying documents, mistreating staff, abusing his power, and stealing. The latter, he was getting taken to court for. The area manager used everything I said against him. I quit a little after this but have a great relationship with the new manager. He is a kind, professional man. I also moved and never saw the customer again. I checked social media, and my old manager had blocked me on everything. I haven't heard from him personally since but heard that he claims I am lying and that I was a spiteful witch. At least he wasn't entirely wrong, I was a spiteful witch. If you want to act all hardcore and think you're above everybody else, you deserve what's coming for you. The last one is titled, "You Should Probably Stop with the Obnoxious Parties." Nobody likes neighbors like this anyway. Let me set the scene. The year is 2017, and my family and I live in a quiet suburban street. It's mostly retired couples and some families with very young kids. Normal. Now earlier this year the house diagonal from us decided to move and sold it. About the day after everything's packed away, 5 cars come peeling down the street and pull into the driveway and out in the road. They're a bunch of college-age kids, so we give them some slack and let them go for a day or two. Meanwhile, day in and day out different cars keep peeling down the street, some are over 30 miles over the speed limit. This does not go over well with the neighbors, for most of the younger kids walk and ride their bikes down our street. Everyone's concerned they might hurt someone or someone's dog. Before something serious can happen, some of the neighbors who've lived here 20+ years go over and meet the newbies. This includes my mum. They're polite at first. They agreed to not go over 35, but more cars keep racing down the road. Along with that, they seem to be having parties every other Tuesday with about 30 cars up the street. Now the niceties are over, and the cops are called. Usually, they wouldn't do this, but about 5 calls came in from a bunch of houses and the police department was fed up. Having nothing better to do, they send one of the deputies and they wait around the corner for a few hours a day. About 2 fines are given, and then they slow down. Except they get smart, there's only one place the deputy can hide, so they send 1 car to see if they're there. If not, they speed again. The deputy gives up after about 3 days and is gone. A few months pass, and we were at a loss of what to do. Summer is almost here, so my brother and I are outside more. We have a basketball hoop at the edge of the road, right across from the house. Our driveway is at almost a 45 degrees angle, and all my brother's buddies come and play, so we leave it there. There's a problem, the cars keep parking to block the hoop. My brother's upset since that's all he used to do in the summer. He goes over to the house, and the guys just shut the door on him. Now my mum's upset. She marches over there and asks them to move their cars, sweetly, and when they refuse she hatches a plan. This summer was a hot one, and my mum decides to cook some homemade pea soup. Now she burns this batch, by accident, of course. Instead of chucking it out, she puts it in this big plastic jar, seals the lid, and places it out on the back porch in the middle of the sun. Weeks pass, and she occasionally opens it. There are maggots squirming around and it's turned a deep brown-green. There's also this clear yellow liquid that separated itself to the top. Disgusting. Meanwhile, my brother is determined to play basketball when there's a little opening. About 20 minutes in, the ball bounces onto one of the cars by accident. There was no mark, but the car alarm goes off, so he's trying to leave. I run out to see one of the regulars who lived there, a woman, yelling obscenities at my brother and how he needs to pay for her car. My mother runs out after me and starts yelling at the lady to get away from my brother. There was no damage, and it was clear, but the lady kept screaming. My brother and I run inside and watch as the woman follows my mum up the driveway, waving her arms and still yelling. My mum yells for her to get off her property or she'll call the cops. By now our older neighbors are watching, some walking over, and the lady realized that she better leave it or she might actually get in trouble. She runs across the street and slams the door. Around 2 a.m. on a Tuesday with one of their parties, my mum puts on a gas mask, my dad worked in pest control so he had one, and takes out the soup. The stench was terrible. It was rotting meat and something indescribable. She takes the jar and goes over to the cars as quietly as possible. Onto almost every car she dumps the rotting pea soup onto the windshield and into that space where there are the windshield wipers. Before anything, I have to explain these were nice cars. Not sports, but Priuses and new cars, which doesn't fit with their age. The next morning, my mum's out sitting in the garage, smoking like always. It's around 6 a.m. and the lady that yelled at my brother comes out first. She's obviously tired as she gets into her car. A minute or two passes and this woman has the most disgusted looking face. She turns on the windshield wipers and a hunk of rotting ham is sent flying. My mum's now in tears, and I mean tears. I wake up and head downstairs to the garage to see the woman yelling and about 20-ish kids heading out to their cars. Each one's trashed. The cops are called, but since there's no evidence, they can't press charges against my mum. One by one they leave in their ruined cars. They moved out 3 weeks later. Thanks for listening.